Good morning to you, Archbishop.
Good morning, Piers. Good morning, Susanna.
Oh, it's nice to see you.
It's great to see you again. We're living in such weird times, and someone like you, I think, is a perfect person to try and put a perspective on all this. You know, I did an Instagram post the other day in which I talked about my grandmother, my late great-grandmother, who was born in the middle of the first pandemic in 1918, lived through the Great Depression, which came when she was 10. She lived through World War II from the age of 18 to 25. She lived through, you know, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the assassinations of Kennedy and Martin Luther King, right up to, you know, the Afghanistan War, the Iraq War, 9/11 and so on, and ended up having, 14 grandchildren, 39 great-grandchildren, and a great full life. The reason I did that was to give people perspective that however bad things seem in the moment, actually, it's a pinprick in history and we'll come through it.
Absolutely. Pinprick, I don't know. I think if you've lost members of your family, if you're really worrying about your job, in each of those periods you talked about, there were really dark moments that you skipped out on the Holocaust and points at which millions and tens of millions of people were killed. But these things will pass. But it doesn't mean they're less serious for those who are in the middle of them. So people today who've got a relative in intensive care or have an elderly relative who's very, very vulnerable, or someone with mental health troubles. I mean, lots of people are really struggling. And it's for the rest of us to show our care and concern for them. But you're quite right, in principle. I mean, this Sunday, we have Remembrance Sunday, and that reminds us of what people went through on our behalf at much more difficult times even than this.
Well, they say don't use the war analogy, but I think it's relevant in the sense that obviously in that period, it put enormous restrictions on people's freedoms and on their life. And, you know, a lot of people were abroad for years, fighting in trenches, you know, not coming home. Everything is relative. This is an awful moment in the history of this country, undeniably. But the restrictions being put on us for many people are not in the same stratosphere as what was going on for 5 years in World War II.
It's interesting, Archbishop, because I take a different view to Piers, and I don't take the perspective view.
You surprise me.
Because...
Even the Archbishop knows that statement didn't need to be made.
The thing is, I'll give you an example. I think that telling people that it's not as bad as it was in the Second World War doesn't help necessarily.
Why? Why doesn't it help?
The family who tried to take their grandmother out of the care home because they were concerned about her during lockdown. The Manchester University students who see fences go up which suggest to them that they're not going to be allowed to leave. I think individuals are really suffering under lockdown, and just saying to them, well, it could be worse, you know, it could also be a lot better, couldn't it? I mean, how do you know, lots of people are having these debates, these fights, these conversations right now. As a religious man, how do you bring people together in a very difficult time?
You bring them together with looking away from themselves to other people. I have one of my relatives who's 90 years old. She is totally outward looking. She's concerned about her grandchildren. She's concerned about her friends. She looks out, and that gives her a real sense of purpose and brings hope to those around her. You do this by looking away from yourself. And the church exists for, I mean, we pray, we love, we serve. And those things give the force to keep going through difficult times. I think, I mean, sorry, this sounds very Anglican, you know, because you always go to the middle, but you're both right. Naturally, I'd hate to disagree with either of you. But
get off that fence, Archbishop.
I'm an archbishop. I'm cemented to the fence. But Jesus came to be with us at Christmas as God himself, to be with people. And when we actually reach out to others, it could be a phone call, it can be a walk, and we show our pastoral care for each other, compassion, that actually makes our situation a lot better. I mean, I agree with you. I think we have to be very calm and very brave at this time. There are lots of people for whom this is a hugely difficult time, and everybody's trouble is sufficient to themselves. And we can't say it doesn't matter. No,
I would never say it doesn't matter. I think it's about perspective. I think a lot of people are going through a really tough time right now, either with health issues which are not COVID related, or they're losing people to COVID, or they're worried about relatives who've had it. My parents just had COVID-19. They may still have the virus at the moment. They've had it for 3 long weeks. It's been very worrying. I get it. I get that side of it. But there are lots of other people who I see just moaning about the right to go to a pub or whatever. And it's to them, I say, try and get a perspective. You know, we're 8 months into this. The Second World War was nearly 6 years that people's restrictions and freedoms were removed, and hopefully we'll be nowhere near that. You yourself, Archbishop, very interestingly revealed recently that you take medication for depression, that you yourself have had a bout of depression. Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, a couple of years ago, I was, my colleagues and my wife and inevitably pointed out that I was not my normal bouncy, happy self. I'm an Eeyore anyway, so bouncy and happy is all relative. But I saw someone, admitted that things were getting on top of me for no particularly good reason. I couldn't explain it. I was given some help, and it changed. And I keep taking some medication and talk to people. I'm quite open and honest about it. It's just one of those things you have. And you, it's like having asthma, which I also have. It's an ongoing thing. And sometimes it's a bore and bother, and sometimes it isn't. There's no point in whinging about it. It's life. Yeah. But we need to recognise it, and people across the country who are struggling need to recognise that, and their friends and relatives need to recognise that. Call them, speak to them, listen to them. People were very kind to me.
What do you make of these extraordinary scenes in America? You know, the most powerful country in the world, Donald Trump hanging on for dear life to his presidency. It looks like it's ebbing away from him, and he's reverting to type, taking it very badly, hates losing. What do you make of it all?
Well, I was fascinated listening to Ian and Jackie a few minutes ago. I thought they were absolutely, they were spot on. I mean, we pray for a decisive and a clear and a widely accepted way forward in the States. I'm not a political pundit. It is really important in these times that people stick together, that even where they differ, they do it without hatred. They learn to disagree well and to be kind to one another. And I think that's one of the problems that we've faced here and around the world, that we've lost the capacity to disagree well. And I notice, I mean, I can quite understand it. I know myself a great deal, but every time I speak, you know, when you look at where it's reported and then you look at the comments below, there's not a lot of kindness in them. And you'd know the same thing, Piers, because not everyone thinks you're their flavour of the month.
Sometimes people are quite close to him.
Beautifully understated, Archbishop, if I may say so.
Can I just give you a piece of advice? Don't read the comments. Do not read the comments. I don't think they're healthy for your... I mean, some of them are going to be positive, but unfortunately the negative comments come to dominate when you read them. And I just don't think they're, you know...
I actually like reading. I've got to be honest with you.
You're unique.
I'm different to you two. I love reading trolls. I like correcting their spelling, taking them on. I see that as all as part of the jungle. But I am a unique animal in that respect. I've got the skin of 1,000 rhinos.
Can I ask you specifically? You talk about medication and talking to people and the power of social connection. For a lot of people, their therapy is going to church or going to whatever religious institution they go to. Now, of course, under lockdown, that isn't possible, but that is something you are trying to change, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the Church of England and the other churches and the faith communities are involved in about 35,000 social projects across this country. the force for that, for Christians, comes from their meeting with Jesus when they worship. Our churches, I've been going to church as usual since the last lockdown, and they are the safest places you go to. People are well spread out. They're wearing masks. They're all registered. They're really serious. They're really sensible about it. But they come together. They worship. They get the strength to serve and love their neighbours. And the church is doing phenomenal stuff in the country in service of Jesus Christ to show the love that God has for us. And ahead of Christmas, it's needed even more. So we all wrote to the government, we're not going to have a great big row with them, and said, we disagree with you about the need to close churches. This is one of the things that holds people together and gives them a real sense of purpose and changes the world. So I think that'll probably change before too long. The government's been very good. They're listening very carefully.
One problem we don't have, which France is going through right now, which is extremely concerning, is a kind of religious-driven war on freedom of speech, freedom of expression, whatever you want to call it, with Islamist terrorists launching a series of attacks, including in churches, and killing people in churches. They're not a safe place at all. What do you think of that, and what do you think the answer is?
Well, I think everyone's struggling with that. First of all, I think religious leaders need to take responsibility for their own communities. I've been saying that for years. Secondly, we need to realise that this is a sort of spin-off, very small, tiny minority from Islam. Thirdly, we need to stand for freedom of speech. And I think that is one of the key things. This country, I'm glad the Church of England was one of those organisations that supported the abolition of the blasphemy laws. We've got to be robust. We've got to take a few of your rhinoceros hides you were talking about a few minutes ago, Piers, and just say, if people insult God, God's big enough to deal with that. And we are going to pray and love and serve and allow freedom of speech, allow criticism, allow people to say what they want to say. We can disagree with them and they'll disagree with us. I'm not frightened of freedom of speech.
Brilliantly said, Archbishop, and I'm very glad you said it. It needs to be reminded every single time. And when people kill in the name of attacking freedom of speech, it is an atrocity.
That is really beyond description. That's appalling. We don't kill. This comes back to disagreeing well.
Yeah, I've listened. I've just written a book about it. I'll send you a copy.
I would.
But it's really about that. It's about we've lost the ability to have a debate and disagree with each other without people immediately going to DEFCON 3 and having hatred and toxicity. And as we see, it leads to extremism. It leads to people being killed. And it's terrifying. Archbishop, we've got to leave it there. I could talk to you all day, to be honest with you. Don't leave it so long next time. We love having you on the programme.
Before you go, I know you want to launch a call for a prayer for the nation.
Prayer for the nation, 6 o'clock every evening during lockdown. You'll hear bells ringing across the nation. Stop for 5 to 10 minutes. It's on our websites and social media, and join in our prayers. If you don't want to do that because you don't believe in prayer, OK, I think you're wrong, but never mind. Ring up, communicate with someone, use those 10 minutes to improve the way we live together.
Do you ever pray for Boris Johnson?
Every day.
Really?
Yeah, of course.
Why isn't it working?
How do you know it isn't?
Archbishop, we'll leave it there.
Do you ever pray for Piers?
I haven't much. I have once or twice when I hear him.
Really? You've actually prayed for me?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. Tell you.
How bad did I have to get for you to do that?
Well, you're doing OK.